barbarians in around 800 BC. By 210 BC, the first emperor of China constructed what would become known as the Long Wall. Like Shulgi, the first emperor understood that he commanded more workers than soldiers. If he couldn't defeat the Huns militarily, he hoped he could at least overwhelm them with productivity. Built by soldiers, vagabonds and peasants, the Long Wall stretched between 1,100 and 1,900 miles on China's vulnerable northern border. The first emperor proclaimed that his wall would allow the people to enjoy calm in their tranquil dwellings. Arms, he said, would no longer be necessary. But the first emperor's Long Wall, like the earlier walls of Shulgi and Nebuchadnezzar, may have simply been too long to defend. The horsemen of the steppe swept across unwalled and unguarded areas. Barbarian raids, a perennial fact of Chinese life, continued. Chinese military advisors despaired of their ability to compete with the Huns. They can withstand the wind and rain, fatigue, hunger and thirst, wrote one. Whereas Chinese soldiers are not so good. As another remarked, trying to catch the Huns is like grabbing at a shadow. Subsequent emperors bartered everything they could in order to get peace. Wagon loads of silk, grain and princesses even were shipped north in futile appeasement of the barbarians.
Hvornår kan børn egentlig begynde at lave mad?
Det kan de jo, når...
Jeg tænker i hvert fald, Asta, hun skal med i køkkenet, så snart hun kan holde på en ske. Så kan man jo gradvist give dem mere og mere ansvar. Start med at rense porre, reducere en sovs, filetere en fisk.
Ja, de kan måske
fermentere. Skal de? Børn, de skal lære noget om madkultur. Ikke? Aftensmaden er jo det vigtigste tidspunkt på dagen. Det er jo det eneste tidspunkt.
Tree rings are wider in periods of heavy rainfall and thinner in years of low rainfall. This study shows that after the year 1350, monsoon rainfall in Southeast Asia became incredibly variable. They might have crossed a bridge wide and strong enough to hold the king's elephants, and seen the green water of the reservoirs rushing beneath them. Today, our cities are made up of dense residential, commercial, and administrative buildings. This division between the wealthy Hindu nobles and the different beliefs of the common people would form a stress line across Cambodian society. We will return to this fracture a number of times over this episode, as it causes ruptures and conflicts, and ultimately threatens to tear the entire empire apart. The most valuable inscription concerning Jayavarman II is the one dated to the year 1052, 2 centuries after his death. It's found at the temple of Sodok Kak Tom in present-day Thailand.
His Majesty Jayavarman came from Java to reign in the royal city of Indrapura.
In Cambodia as something like Christianity during the 1st and 2nd centuries in the Roman Empire. When a liberal and tolerant ruler held power, its followers could go about more or less unmolested, but it took only one tyrant for things to get unpleasant. But now, just as Christianity had in Rome, Buddhists began to take over the culture that had once persecuted them. Buddhism succeeded in Cambodia because it was inclusive and universal in its outreach. And this shift of administrative power to the south doesn't seem to explain the wholesale abandonment of the entire city. So what happened? Many explanations have been given for the abandonment of Angkor. Some historians have argued that only a cataclysm, like a great earthquake or the arrival of bubonic plague, can account for the disappearance of such a vast population. But because of the scarcity of inscriptions through the Cambodian Dark Ages, we're left with only the archaeological record to go by. The capital is today. It was the end of the great golden era of the Khmer Empire, and for the city of Angkor, it was the first step in its gradual but inescapable collapse. It was the first step in its gradual but inescapable collapse. It's worth noting at this point that Angkor had recovered from the destruction of war in the past. In fact, some of its greatest architectural achievements had risen out of the ashes of destruction, such as Angkor Thom in the time of Jayavarman VII. And this shift of administrative power to the south doesn't seem to explain the wholesale abandonment of the entire city. Words that you might recognize. For instance, the Sanskrit word for tooth is danta. This shares a common ancestor with our English word dentist, which has passed through French, medieval then ancient Latin, ancient Greek, and finally the theoretical language we call Proto-Indo-European, which branched off around 5,000 years ago. At the time of the Khmer Empire's flourishing, classical Sanskrit became the language used among the elite of Southeast Asia, just like Greek and Latin were once required learning among Europe's nobility. But it's important to note at heart, Jayavarman II was a revolutionary. He wanted to forge an independent, united kingdom for the Khmer people, and his campaign of rebellion was immensely successful. He first seized the city of Vyadapura in the southeast, and then pushed up the Mekong River to take Sambupura. He and his
Overraskende billige priser på nemlig.com. Normalpris op til 27,95. I denne uge, lurpak, flere varianter på tilbud til kun 15 kroner.
Meanwhile, the Han emperors sent more colonists to the walled frontier. Far to the west, to the Silk Road cities of Central Asia. Similarly civilized regions on the border of the barbarian world. The wall's guardians, mostly relocated slaves, criminals and peasants, sang folk songs about their plight. One went, "If a son is born, don't raise him. If a girl is born, feed her dried meat. Don't you just see below the long wall, dead men's skeletons prop each other up?"
Like queens, and the men would be doing most of the hard work. But it seems like women are working way harder here.
After tea, Lucy's mum proudly took me out to the field. She'd worked and farmed her whole life.
I should do it like this? Oh my god, this is heavy. Do you do this all day? You must have such muscles. I mean, look at this place. It's like ridiculously beautiful and organic and everything. But it's sort of lost a bit of its charm to me after having had tea with the grandmas, because I can't help but feeling that matriarchy here is just a way of glorifying housewives, and the women work so hard. But at least they're being appreciated for what they're doing. They're the ones inheriting the property. And it's pretty sensible, actually. You'll never have a woman on the street with her kids not knowing where to go or how to feed them, and they're always getting lots of help from their family, so there are no divorces, there's no slut shaming, there's a sort of acknowledgement of how love is something fleeting, and in their own way, they have found some form of gender balance, I guess.
To find out how the younger girls felt about the very traditional way of life that the Mosuo still lead, we caught up with our museum guide Kumu and her best friend Zima, both in their early 20s.
觉得这边还是有点落后这样子。
我就说，我想当时是他了哇，是你们了哇。哇，现在你看，我天天说笑，掉地，磕头的毛主席。
So you love Mao?
至少是睡好也好，穿的也好，吃的也好，好的哪去喽？是睡好是出门也过喽，好舒服喽。
Are you worried that with all these changes and all these new opportunities for young people, that the ancient Mosuo traditions are disappearing?
我们只给他们看了，他们也知的，他们也知，我们只给他们看，他们也知。下一代他们会经历这个吗？
Meanwhile, the Han emperors sent more colonists to the walled frontier. Far to the west, to the Silk Road cities of Central Asia. Similarly civilized regions on the border of the barbarian world. The wall's guardians, mostly relocated slaves, criminals and peasants, sang folk songs about their plight. One went, "If a son is born, don't raise him. If a girl is born, feed her dried meat. Don't you just see below the long wall, dead men's skeletons prop each other up?"
He set the rest of the prisoners free because he knew the penalty for failure in his duty was death. Grateful for their newly acquired liberty, many of the former prisoners pledged their loyalty to Liu Bang. They formed a small group of marauding bandits, which likely spent much of its time avoiding capture by Qin imperial troops. Liu Bang may have spent the rest of his life as a common bandit, had it not been for the civil war that plunged the country into chaos. This civil war was set in motion by the unexpected death of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, who may have died from drinking one too many toxic immortality potions. He was succeeded by his young son, Shi, who was decadent, weak-willed, and refused to listen to any bad news. Consequently, this allowed the emperor's boyhood tutor, Zhao Gao, who was promoted to imperial chancellor, to seize power. Zhao Gao raised taxes across the empire to fund an extravagant court, and went on an unrestricted spree of executing real and imagined rivals, purging the court of its most competent ministers, princes, military officers, and their families. All of this led to widespread revolts of the provincial nobility and peasant uprisings. Liu Bang's bandits joined the most formidable of the rebel armies, commanded by Xiang Yu, a nobleman from the resurgent state of Chu. There he quickly rose through the ranks, becoming Xiang Yu's most effective general. Xiang Yu decisively defeated the Qin army at the Battle of Julu, while Liu Bang took the capital city and accepted the last Qin emperor's surrender. Xiang Yu granted him the title, King of Han. While Liu Bang had been merciful to surrendering Qin troops and the young emperor, Xiang Yu was not. He ordered many thousands of Qin soldiers to be buried alive as punishment for their disloyalty. He later sacked the capital city and slaughtered the Qin royal family that had previously surrendered to Liu Bang. Xiang Yu attempted to re-establish 18 of the kingdoms that had existed before the Qin unification, with himself at the head. First by controlling a puppet emperor from his own state, who he had assassinated, and then by granting himself the title Ba Wang, meaning overlord or hegemon king. Despite his efforts, this loose confederation was at war with itself even before it had formed. Many feared being purged by the merciless Xiang Yu, while many more believed the land should remain united, viewing Xiang's regime as a return to the centuries-long feudal chaos of the Warring States period. Those disaffected found a champion in Liu Bang, who had gained a reputation for being merciful to the defeated and a generous patron to his followers. The two leaders had a falling out, and after 4 more years of conflict, Liu Bang was victorious, uniting the Middle Kingdom by 202 BC, declaring himself the Emperor Gaudi of the Han Dynasty. During his 11-year reign, the Emperor Gaudi focused on bringing internal stability, peace, and prosperity to the empire. To accomplish this, he drastically lowered taxes on the common people, cutting them completely in some devastated regions for up to 7 years. He also freed many slaves and disbanded a large portion of the army. Gaudi promoted common people to the highest ranks in government, and instructed his officials to do the same, hiring people for their ability rather than their birth and family connections. This process was later formalized during the reigns of his successors, when civil service exams were introduced, where common people of exceptional skill could obtain government ministerial positions previously reserved only for the nobility. In one later example, a particularly intelligent pig farmer passed the civil service exams and rose through the ranks to become the Imperial Grand Chancellor of the Han Empire, a position second only to the emperor himself. Gaudi divided the administration of the empire in two. The west was overseen by appointed imperial governors, while the east was overseen by his family members, who were given the ancient noble titles of the regions they administered. Importantly, Gaudi made peace with the northern nomadic Xiongnu Confederation, which had been successfully raiding China during its time of strife. He agreed to refer to them as equals, and pay them an annual tribute of wine, other luxury goods, and noble women for Xiongnu warlords to marry. Although this tribute was humiliating, it was a tiny fraction of the cost of previous wars with the Xiongnu. The ensuing peace allowed the Han Empire's population and economy to recover, and surpass any previous level of prosperity the land had enjoyed. For 60 years, the peace with the Xiongnu was maintained. Gaudi's successors ruled over a powerful state that expanded to the north and south, particularly during the reign of the Emperor Wu, who conquered the southern kingdoms of Nanyu, Minyu, Kujosan on the Korean peninsula, and decisively defeated the Xiongnu Confederation, but at a great cost. The Great Han treasury was depleted, hundreds of thousands of soldiers died, and famine spread through the land, as peasant farmers were taxed heavily. However, the constant greatest threat to the empire's stability was arguably no foreign power, but the in-law families of a dowager empress and that of a current empress. Throughout the Western Han period, the magnificent imperial palace complex at the capital Chang'an was frequently kept bathed in a fresh coat of the defeated's blood in a never-ending game of palace intrigue. This fighting eventually spilled out of the palace into open civil war, when a powerful dowager empress placed her nephew on the imperial throne. Wang Mang's short-lived Qin dynasty ambitiously sought to reform the empire. The number of state-run monopolies
Peter, you can tell I'm different because my weapon is different.
Oh, well then maybe I won't be able to chop your head off. Oh, yep.
In 15 AD, in Germany, a detachment of Roman soldiers under the command of their general Germanicus made a grim discovery.
He conquered much of the Balkans, he finished the conquest of Spain, and he annexed Egypt. In fact, these acquisitions for the Roman Empire were more than any previous individual in Roman history. It seems that to Romans, at the beginning of Augustus's reign, Rome had a divine mission. There would be endless empire, conquest without end.
But there were lands of which Rome knew nothing.
They didn't know how big the world was, and they...
Confused, Demoralized and hemmed in on all sides, the survivors could only go forward. The weather had deteriorated. There were violent thunderstorms. For Romans, a portent of disaster.
The empire, and therefore there was almost nothing standing between Italy and Germany.
The first find of Roman silver coins, they were fairly well spread out. But I turned around, returned the following weekend, and was successful in locating the core of the actual find. And within this core, there was approximately 80-odd Roman silver coins. So I recovered all those, bagged them up, and then subsequently handed them in the following week.
The silver coins were of the Augustan period. In this case, the type and distribution of the coins conform to a theory by the eminent 19th century historian Theodore Mommsen. Mommsen had studied a similar hoard found 100 years earlier, and in the same area.
Mommsen reasoned that to sweeten the German tribes, Varus must have been carrying large quantities of gold and silver coin. It followed that if he were to plot all Augustan coin finds in northwestern Germany to see if they seemed to radiate from a single point, he might find the battlefield.
Applying Mommsen's theory to his own finds, Clun realized that they all seemed to emanate from a single point. The single point was a narrow gap where, 2,000 years ago, steep forest met impenetrable bog near a place called Calcrisa. But then, a coin with a difference. Virtually the signature of Varus himself.
The turning point was when we found the first copper coin with a countermark of Varus himself. The countermark has 3 letters, V-A-R, Varus. And it indicates that Varus put the countermarks on those coins.
It also put Varus and his army at Calcrisa, a long, long way from the relative safety of either the Rhine or the Lippe.
Varus arrived, as it is written, at the Rhine in the year 67 AD. And that means this site could not be dated earlier than 6 or 7 AD.
Still think that it takes money to make money? Bullshit. That's just what rich people want you to believe so that they can carry on making passive income.
State-run monopolies were increased from 2 to 6. All land became property of the emperor and was redistributed to the landless poor. This and many other of his policies were implemented and then reversed after being met with great resistance, especially from the merchant class and nobility. A series of severe natural disasters and famine convinced many that Wang Mang and his policies lacked the mandate of heaven. Throughout the empire, many starving peasants turned to banditry and rebellion. The most formidable faction were called the Red Eyebrows because they painted their foreheads red to distinguish between themselves and those loyal to the government. The entire empire eventually rose in rebellion against Wang Mang, with several warlords from the Han royal family all claiming to be the legitimate emperor. After being decisively defeated in battle by the Red Eyebrows and retreating to his capital, Wang Mang died in battle. The Red Eyebrows deposed one Han emperor and installed a younger, weaker one that they could control. The Red Eyebrows were initially seen as champions of the common people, who time and again defied the odds, beating larger, better-equipped imperial armies. As they gained more power, this image changed to that of a disorganized mob, whose decentralized leadership couldn't control it and had little plan how to do so. After losing popular support, the number of Red Eyebrows dwindled from desertion, disease, and defeat. Exhausted and demoralized, they surrendered to Liu Xiu, who was one of 11.
The 3,000-year-old late Bronze Age settlement. This had stood at the time the Trojan War was supposed to have taken place. But Layer 6 was nothing like the city described in Homer's epic, the Iliad. That prompted skeptics to claim it was simply not big enough to qualify as Troy. Indeed, the entire site was little bigger than the Tower of London.
LiDAR works in a similar way to radar. It scans the ground by sending out 1 million laser points every 4 seconds and analyzing the information reflected back. The time it takes for each pass to break through the trees, hit the ground, and return is measured. The results are then mapped. The LiDAR data renders an outline of everything on the surface of the land. The glory of Angkor Wat becomes a ghostly outline of digital points. But LiDAR also reveals subtle indentations on the ground, and these reveal the shape of the original city. Angkor Wat is shown to be surrounded by the ghostly outline of a vast metropolis. And we can use this data to rebuild the city of Angkor as it would have looked over 900 years ago.
Hvem tager klassekassen?
Den tager jeg.
He and his followers swept from southeast Cambodia to the northwest, and everywhere he went, people joined his army. One rare inscription shows how Jayavarman's campaign seemed to happen almost miraculously. As well as the priests and holy men in the temples, lived in luxury. The king's palace required the services of up to 4,000 palace women, for instance, while according to the inscriptions at just one medium-sized temple, it required a staff of 1,000 administrators, 600 dancers, 95 professors, and a whole host of other staff, amounting to nearly 13,000 people. And all of this opulence came at the expense of the peasants. But all this promised to come to an end with the spread of Theravada Buddhism. This new breed of Buddhist priests lived in grass huts among the villages rather than in golden temples. It's not hard to see how this new religion became so popular among Cambodia's people, and how dangerous it would soon become for the authority of the crown. By the year 1295, only 70 years after Jayavarman VII's death, the spread of Theravada Buddhism meant that the king was no longer considered to have any religious authority. The reign of the god kings had come to an end, and for the rulers of the empire that followed, this would spell disaster. When Jayavarman VII died in the year 1220, he would have been close to 100 years old. The mourning must have been tremendous. The pipes and conches, the drums and gongs and flutes that sounded at his funeral would have been audible from great distances.
People discovering they had their mother only died a year ago, and they've been 40 years searching and given the impression they'd no parents. Unbelievable miscarriage of justice.
the nation daily with his congregation, as well as openly protesting both their treatment and the Nazi euthanasia programs. Despite countless warnings that if he continued his very public denouncement of the Nazis and their actions, there would be severe consequences, he
Tag en tur til Troberne, spar op til 1000 kroner og forkæl familien med en herlig LaLandia-ferie. Har plads til leg og skønne øjeblikke. Bo i eget feriehus og giv familien en ferie fuld af minder. En varm miniferie, tæt på hjemmet, langt fra hverdagen. Book nu på lalandia.dk og spar op til 1000 kroner.
We were too few in number to matter to the Nazis. And I avoided all contact with white women. That would have been horrible. I would have been sterilized. And I might also have been charged with racial defilement.
You say that you took great care not to get too close to white women or girls. Was it like hiding or trying to become invisible? How can we imagine that?
Can you explain what I'm seeing? So we had Amela House, and this here shows us the trail of tobacco. So you see enslaved African men harvesting tobacco, then enslaved African women packaging the tobacco. Then it is sorted and weighed, you know, there's a white overseer, and then it's packaged further, it's made ready for shipment. And you see one of the white overseers is already lounging and having a smoke. Right. But then you see the ship departing for Berlin. And you can clearly see it's Berlin because you see the silhouette of the German and the French dome. So this. And in peace.
Yes, Papa.
I am sorry, she is still very curious.
I know you.
Yes, in the restaurant of
Us? You'd be mortal and can finally die.
This one's good. Oh, this one's even better.
Yeah, a bit past the sell-by date, I'm afraid.
Wait till Abel wakes up in this body.
I never thought I'd say this.
They care about the cat, but we all know the story behind the crates that are dumped here. Every rescuer that sees a crate, their heart automatically drops because they know what this typically means.
Of the man believed to have kidnapped Emanuela. Who is this man? "13 days after my sister disappeared,
of age. They were not only granted their freedom, but also given a stipend as they left the estate so that they could start their lives on their own. Jefferson himself, contrary to his own practices, was opposed to slavery as an institution. Still, this did not prompt him to free all of his own slaves. The fact that he granted Sally Hemings and her children their freedom suggested that he had a more personal connection with them than he did with the other slaves on his property. Whether or not there are some verbal agreement between Jefferson and Hemings regarding her freedom, Hemings stayed at Monticello Plantation until Jefferson died in 1826. It's unclear if she couldn't leave or wanted to stay with Jefferson. Some of her children had already left by that time. When the hidden room was discovered at Monticello Plantation, it was revealed that Hemings had 5 children while at the estate. Assuming that Jefferson and Hemings had some sort of relationship between them, historians began to speculate that
This is the story of a busy city, once full of life, and a village not far away.
Hej, jeg hedder Mark, og jeg kommer fra First Aid. Og i dag skal vi se på det her skab. Det er et Nordic K15-skab. Et indendørs hjertestarterskab. Og det unikke ved den her model, det er, at det passer til alle hjertestarter på det danske marked.
And that means there's always plenty to eat. Back at the old house, the kittens are almost weaned. And that means she must leave them alone while she makes frequent hunting trips to bring back food.
The cat is the Europeans' favorite animal. In Germany alone, there are 12 million cats. At the southern edge of the park, 2 more seniors have their home. But they're not friends. Although the family took in the two cats at the same time, they have very different characters.
Leider so nicht.
3 cats have found a good home close to Bauhaus University. A house with a garden and a caring family. The park is just across the street. But the backyard and the adjoining university grounds are so extensive that the animals can avoid the street. At least, their owners hope they do. Rudy is making one of his highly efficient excursions tonight. This time, he's patrolling the middle of the park. The river forms a natural boundary. It's tempting to cross it. But neither cat dares violate the border and declare war. For both of them, the risk of being defeated is too great. A truce. The two cats respect each other's territory, at least for tonight. All the cats in the study return home during the night. They have adapted their biorhythm, at least partly. After half an hour, the animals split up. One of them takes a very special route. Henning runs through the park to List's house, across a bridge in the direction of Goethe's garden house, and in a wide arc across another bridge back home. The excursion lasts an hour. It's also a stay-at-home. These two have the smallest territory of all the cats in the study, and they take turns using it, sometimes only for a few minutes.
Die Mutter von Lars, das war auch so eine...
Lars's mother was also a wild cat. Some time ago, we caught her in a game trap and had her sterilized, so that we wouldn't have 10 new Larses running around here every year. Orphaned strays, like those that the animal conservationists take to the vet Axel Peukert. They have to be fattened up first. Neglect leads to malnutrition, severe illness, and often death in kittens. Cats adapted to humans and became domesticated 10,000 years ago. Left to their own devices crossing the street, they usually get to be quite old. But when I look at the data, I see that all 3 cats cross the street and run in the park several times a day.
Diese große Straße kreuzen und in den Park laufen.
The 50-hectare park has a mixed landscape. Irregular-shaped meadows with flower beds and trees. Relaxing for humans, it's an irresistible hunting ground for cats. She crosses the wide street and runs through the long grass towards the river Ilm, which flows through the middle of the park. A short while later, Rudy also leaves the house. The cat's vision gives it an advantage in the dusk. The animal opens its slit-shaped pupils and only needs 1/6 of the light that humans need to see an image. Cats cannot see the color red. On the other hand, they can see multiple shades of blue. All its senses are alert. Now the cat becomes a superior hunter.
Der Henning
Of all the cats in the study, Henning has the largest territory. It stretches in all directions and often takes him deep into the park. Henning's territory is 5 times bigger than that of the other cats in his family. Just 2 years old, he's the youngest in the study. The data clearly shows that male cats and young animals have much larger areas of activity than females and older cats. Presumably, Rudy also used to have a much larger territory. At the end of the research week, some of the cat owners meet in Rudy's garden.
Coma breath. Coma? How long was I out? What year is this? It's whatever year Quentin Tarantino used to watch television. Well, can I go home? Well, you're not really ready, but so close. No, this is better. Sorry, that's my car alarm. Cleveland, turn that off!
I'm pressing the button.
You gotta put the keys in the ignition.
I've been doing that, but oh, there we go.
Trisha Takanawa, 88.
Peter, I'm standing here because I am the only Asian recurring character on the series.